Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another segment of Midwest Chicana Podcast. Today, we're going to hold very interesting conversations. And to give you a quick insight, it's going to be about mental health and suicide prevention. And today, we have two amazing guests. I will be your host today, Diosselyn, and then I will let Oscar and Karina introduce themselves.
Thank you, Diosselyn. So hello, everyone. My name's Oscar Orozco. I am a social worker here in Kansas City. I'm passionate about mental health, suicide prevention, my work in that, and specifically loss and grief. Thank you again for having me back.
Thank you for joining us. We are excited to learn more. And Karina, do you mind introing yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Karina Acevedo. I am a social worker based in Los Angeles in California, and I currently have a Bachelor of Social Work, and I work as a case manager and jail in-reach staff for a forensic mental health program. So I work with individuals who have frequent incarceration history, are currently on county probation, and have a mental illness and a substance use disorder.
Thank you so much for joining us. And we want to shout out Lucero for introducing us and having you join us as well. We are super happy to have you here and start the conversation. So you guys have a lot of knowledge to share with us.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Luz.
So to start it off, I kind of just want to kick off the conversation. I know, again, just want to tell everybody we're talking about mental health and suicide prevention. So there might be a little bit of intense conversations. However, this is what it's all about, right? Start conversations about these taboo topics to figure out how we can best help and have some tools under our belts. So I want to ask, how do you start a conversation like this? How do you come about the topic? How can you start mentioning this with family, friends, and not feel so anxious like I am feeling a little bit right now?
Yeah, thank you for being honest, and I think it's really important for us to notice that, right? That these conversations are hard. They might be a little bit awkward or hard to have, but are important, especially with everything going on. So before I kind of answer your question, Diosselyn, about how to start these conversations, just a kind of background of why we are having this conversation, right? And really was because of, and as we mentioned in previous podcasts and episodes that I've been on, just with everything really going on, a lot of things you look at, just things going on in society around the world, police brutality, the uncertainties with all of the COVID-19 pandemic things happening, work situations, loss of occurring in personal life, and how all that really adds up, and we don't address it, right? And it's only addressed sometimes, unfortunately, when something really big or a big crisis happens, that these conversations are first brought up. So this is kind of what I wanted to have this conversation, very open conversation. And, if you are listening and you feel yourself maybe a little bit triggered, definitely, take a step back, get yourself composed. And if you can rejoin, and if you can't, that's fine. You can always see if you can tune in and rewatch the episode later. Karina, I don't know if you want to add anything, kind of what you're noticing in LA and California as well.
I think a really important place for us to start in order to have a conversation about mental health, unfortunately, a lot of times it falls to those who have mental illnesses and mental health disorders to explain it for everyone else, and it shouldn't have to be that way. They should already be welcomed and understood in society, but there isn't enough awareness. So I think it starts at the education level. I think that this should be taught in schools from the time that children are in kindergarten. And I think it also comes down to mental health providers like myself to have these conversations with people and destigmatize mental health. By destigmatization, I mean talking about mental health and making it normal. Talking about depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia as normal, in the same way that you would talk about any physical ailment or something that is not mental health related, right? So I think that it is up to us to have those important conversations and not hold back from them and really normalize them. Even if, sometimes like I struggle with my own anxiety and I might feel like what I'm feeling is not normal or so overwhelming or so ridiculous and no one else can, relate to it. I also, as a mental health provider, understand that that's not true. And those are my own fears and anxious thoughts that are telling me that. But it is up to me because I have this what we call mental health literacy because I've studied it and I work in it. It's up to me to have those open and honest conversations with other people who might not have that kind of awareness. So I think that we need to be loud and bold and brave in sharing those stories. I think people are slowly starting to get there. I've noticed, Los Angeles is such a diverse community, and also there's just so many people here. It is overwhelming. So, we have people with all different types of experiences and many people who have mental illnesses that live out here and, are open to talking about it. And a lot of times I see, we talk a lot about depression and anxiety, but I don't see enough of, other mental health issues brought up to the table. It's not as cool or niche or exciting to talk about psychosis and symptoms of schizophrenia such as hallucinations and hearing voices. It's not trendy or attractive to talk about that, but it is attractive to talk about panic attacks because you see them on TV and they're more normalized and they are honestly more common. So I think it's important for us to be just really bold in starting those conversations and then being willing to answer questions. And then also when somebody does ask us a question, if we don't have the answer, direct them to someone who might.
And just really quick to add to that, as when you mentioned, how do we ask someone? So sometimes, in our day to day, we go around asking people, how are you? Right. And we ask, I think, just because it's a programmed into our minds, just to ask someone that to be polite. But, most people will answer with, I'm okay, I'm fine, I'm alive. And it's typically where it ends because most people typically know that the person who's asking me how I'm doing doesn't really want to know how I'm doing. They don't really want to know what's really going on at home, what's really going on in my head, the struggles that I'm facing. For example, as we were mentioning with all this, if someone asks me how I'm doing and I'm really overwhelmed and I'm actually experiencing my own mental health crisis, do I want to be, is this person really safe for me to be vulnerable with? Is it okay for me to open up and talk about what's occurring in my life? And so I think we need to be more mindful as well when we are asking people, how are you? To be prepared to really accept and be open for that and be prepared to not just receive I'm okay. Sometimes someone might say, I'm really struggling today. And then that's where people might freeze and they're like, uh-oh, like I didn't expect this person to really start disclosing this information, and so sometimes you get into those awkward situations. So I always tell people, really be mindful if you are asking someone how they're doing, just be really prepared to accept that information and be open in case they aren't having a good day. And if you aren't prepared to absorb that information, then maybe you shouldn't be asking someone to disclose that information. So I always say people, if they feel comfortable with you, if they feel safe with you, and they do disclose something personal that's in regards to their mental health, if you are comfortable to engage in that conversation and are willing to allow that person to be vulnerable in that safe space with you, just continuing to say, I'm sorry to hear that, or thank you for telling me that. Is that something that you want to continue are comfortable talking to me more about? Is that a topic that you're comfortable talking about? And if they say yes, that conversation starts to build. And it's not that you have to get to know the entire story, but maybe over time, but slowly that trust begins. So that's kind of a little bit to answer of how do you begin? It's a natural conversation. Again, making it normalized, not having to have a talk, to talk about mental health. It should just be normal and part of our everyday language.
Thank you both for sharing that. And I think both of you guys have hit on two really good things, which is, the fact that we're trying to figure out through everything that's happening right now in our world, because it's hitting us left and right, how do we respond to this, right? And then there's that whole point of the stigmatism that's already there and normalizing what we already know that's there, but for some reason we try not to see it, or we don't see it, or I don't know, because it goes back to, what you said, Karina. We should be willing and welcoming since the get-go, but we're not. We ask questions afterwards and we try to figure it out afterwards. If you're anything like me, I keep thinking about it and I'm just like, oh my God, was that offensive to somebody? But again, I didn't really prepare myself. So going forward, we're talking about how to start these conversations, and you guys are both saying, let's normalize this, let's make it as comfortable as possible. But we have been taught to not make this normal as possible, right? We have been taught that we don't talk about this. If somebody says there's a mental health issue, like tomate un té, go to sleep, things like that. We're dismissed, right? How do we, go from there? How do we even break our own barriers that are already there, that the values that were imposed on us, to be able to normalize the conversation? Just to give you guys an example, I had some friends that have told me and disclosed information with me, and sometimes I do freeze and I don't know what else to say, and I just listen, but I don't even know if that's the right response.
I think number one, listening, I think is very helpful. Number one, it is crucial, honestly, sometimes, because people sometimes really do want to talk about what's going on. It helps to talk about it. It helps to identify it and say, this is happening. And it's not just something that's in my head, it's really going on. And so, to also talk back about how do we break our own stigmas is kind of how Karina mentioned earlier, educating ourselves. It is personal responsibility to say, if I want to be someone who can be of help and of use and of a resource to someone, then I need to educate myself, right? If I'm uncomfortable about a subject, I need to talk to someone who is knowledgeable in that subject and say, hey, can you guide me? What are some resources? How can I get comfortable and familiarized with this uncomfortable or difficult subject? It takes you stepping out of your comfort zone. It takes you, really challenging, stereotypes or stigmas or beliefs that were passed through generations that now come to us. And as we're getting older, we say, I know my family, growing up just said this, and I just kind of went along with it. But now, do I really believe that? Do I really agree with that mental health is not real, that you can just drink a tea or, say, do a couple of things and then it just goes away? I don't think so. I don't believe that anymore. And so I went out and I educated myself, right? I went out and I said, I want to learn what mental health really does look like and feel like, and how to help people who are experiencing that, because of my own experience also with anxiety and depression, suicidal ideation when I was younger, and how that propelled me to want to learn even more. And so that is kind of what I think. It does take, it is hard, but it's not impossible. And if you truly want to help people and be that pillar of support, it does take work. And Karina, I don't know if you have anything to add as well.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that you cite your own experience that really got you interested in this field and made you educate yourself on what mental health is. And in my experience, 9 times out of 10, when you meet someone who's a social worker or a therapist or works in this realm, we have had our own struggles, especially in the mental health field, Like, I feel like on any staff I've been a part of, so many of us have had our own mental health issues. And that's just because, A, it's really way more common than people think it is to have a mental health struggle. And B, we do the work that we know. We do what we understand. And I think when people have mental illnesses and mental health issues, they have to learn to be their own best advocates, because unfortunately we do live in a society that doesn't always advocate for us. I think that, I mean, there's obviously so many reasons that mental health isn't talked about enough, and that it's kind of scary, and that it's stigmatized. I think a big reason for that, stepping aside from the whole, cultural reasons and those barriers, I think that part of the reason why it's so scary for people, as opposed to maybe a physical health issue, is because mental illness you can't always see. If you just look at a picture of someone, you're not going to know if they're mentally ill. You cannot guess their diagnosis. Whereas for many, not all, but many physical health issues, you can see if somebody is missing a limb. You can see if they have a skin condition. You can identify with your eyes if somebody is sitting in a wheelchair. So when it comes to things like mental health or chronic invisible illnesses, there is an element of fear, because you're not sure what to expect, because when you're not living in that person's brain, you don't know what their brain is doing at that moment, unless they're saying it to you. So I think, the fear of the unknown is incredibly uncomfortable. Like if you're about to jump into the ocean and you have no idea how deep it is, what kind of sea creatures are in there, it's kind of terrifying and nerve-wracking. So I think that is where that stigma is. I think that has to do that's a big part of it. And I think that the more conversations we have about it, the more we actually listen to people who have these experiences, and the more, quite frankly, that we Google stuff and start reading articles and start, watching videos of people who have these lived experiences, the less scary it'll be. Just because something's invisible doesn't mean that it is uncontrollable or scary or wrong or bad. It just means you have to do a little bit more deep diving to understand it.
Thank you. Again, like this is all things that we all need to listen to, and I welcome everybody who's listening. If you guys have comments, questions, just go ahead and write those into the comment box. We'll go ahead and try to answer them as well. But thank you both for saying those things, because I think, like you said, the fact that, again, we're taught not to talk about it, we are set to just let it go, or it doesn't, it doesn't exist for some reason in our eyes. But like you said, it's not something that we can easily detect. And maybe that is the hard part, where we're just surprised, not used to. I don't, coming from a different perspective, I'm listening to you guys, I really think about those things. And I think about the situations that I'm placed in, and talking about educating ourselves and just trying to figure out what those protocols look like. And I'm glad I have friends as social workers as well, because I am getting taught so much. Again, I would never have these conversations if you guys weren't willing to have these conversations with us. And I know we talked a little bit about, Oscar, you mentioned about suicide and that ideation, I believe you called it, suicide ideation. And I know that has been a heavy topic in our communities. Maybe we don't see that much about it, but the numbers are rising heavily. There are a lot of things happening around us in our communities, locally, friends, family members, etc., that are going through something because they, this was a huge change. So talking about that topic, what are your thoughts? What are some first things that you guys think on this as you guys see this develop out?
Well, as you mentioned, Diosselyn, in social work, what we have, one of our theories, if you will, is called the systems theory, where we really look at the person and environment. And what we mean by that is that we understand that as humans, there's a lot of things that influence us, that impact us, that are constantly changing. For example, for me, as if I was a student and also working, so I have in my system, it would be my school, it would be my work, it would be my family, life and what's going on with family, personal. It would be things that friends, if I am a person of color, especially Black individuals right now, there's another layer to that system, of extra layers of fears, of protective factors that they have to put into that system, additional stress, anxiety. Latinos, if having to worry about maybe that increased anxiety of increased ICE activity, with such crackdown with immigration right now. That is fear-provoking, something to incorporate in the system. So we know that there's a lot that that it impacts us and that we need to take into consideration to really try to, solve those underlying issues. So with suicide, with individuals, and let me clarify, with suicidal ideation, those are, the thoughts coming to your mind. So, if when life gets difficult and, when your coping skills, when stressors, typically, people have coping skills. And so when stressors start to rise, if people have protective factors, coping skills, they tend to, be okay and buffer out that. But if people have, poor coping skills and the stressors keep rising, that's when there's issues. That's when we see mental health diagnosis or symptoms and that suicidal ideation, especially, coming from a hospital setting, working in a hospital, a pediatric hospital with children, adolescents, young adults. We just see it in a variety of ways. And so one of the reasons, that people sometimes that comes is when all those things come in life stacked on you at once, and you are not able to handle those or reach out for help or identify the need for help, because sometimes with mental health, asking for help sometimes is hard because we don't want to put that burden, right? We don't want to put what we have onto others, and it's better to not to keep quiet. That's what we hear a lot, and that's what I felt, when I was younger to my family, and so it's important because when individuals complete suicide, and I think that's an important word that I think I always try to help people educate themselves on, instead of committed, because when you say committed, you think of the word committed, you think, committed a crime, committed, it's something negative where that word comes from, and we want to take that away from suicide. So we say they completed suicide. And so we, again, trying to remove that stigma, and it could be subconscious stigma, right? That again, society just has that we don't really think about, but subconsciously it's happening. And so again, it's something that's just not spoken about. If someone or discloses that they're having suicidal ideation, again, how comfortable are you on a scale of 1 to 10 to be able to say, I'm confident that I can help and steer that conversation in a healthy way, and that if it becomes a crisis, I know what to do to help this individual. Most people don't, unfortunately. And again, that comes with the education that's needed from our parts. But we do see that. And another important statistic to remember is that if someone completes suicide, the risk of another person close to that individual completing suicide also increases. And so that is why you have to keep really close eyes on family members, on really close friends, people who are really connected, attached with that individual. If they already have pre-existing mental health diagnosis, that could be impactful. That could be hard. So it's just so complex. Again, mental health is complex. It's not easy. But that's why we're having these conversations, right? That's why we are doing our parts, as Karina mentioned, as social workers, as people with education, to share that knowledge, to share that with people so they know what to do to better help their family, their friends, a stranger, who comes to them or they can sense something's wrong, they know what to do or are comfortable at least to ask.
Thank you. Yeah, wow, I did not know about that completed and committed. I think committed is definitely something that I automatically can think of right away of hearing people say versus completed. So it's good to know that, learning as we're going forward. And man, it's crazy to hear just how this can be super effective to a lot of people nearby, and us not really realizing how impactful it is, even though we do know that it's very impactful in our own world, just not realizing how, like you mentioned, Karina, I think you said it's like an ocean. We don't know what lies down there. We don't know those creatures down there. And I would love to hear more about what you think on this question and this sentence, this things that we've shared so far.
I lost the mute button for a second. Yeah, I think that there's no, even though there is a strict formula that mental health providers and social workers have to follow to assess someone when somebody discloses that they are having suicidal ideations, though there is a formula that and a rubric, so to speak, that we follow to assess someone, there really isn't a super clear formula to follow that will tell you if somebody will do this or not, because everyone's situation is so different. And sometimes like substance, I work a lot in substance use, so people who are experiencing substance use disorders, an addiction to some sort of substance, narcotic, alcohol, etc. A lot of times that can increase their risk of passing away from suicide or completing suicide, whereas sometimes for others that drug or that addiction might be the only thing that's keeping them alive. So each situation is really different, which is why it's so incredibly important to have conversations, like for myself with my clients, or if I have a friend who's struggling. Something I always look out for is if a person suddenly starts isolating themselves. That's a big red flag for me, even if it doesn't signal that they might it might not signal that they are having thoughts of ending their life. It can still mean that they're not okay, especially if that person is typically outgoing, engaging with friends, talkative, willing to share about what's going on. And then all of a sudden, there's a lack of interest in activities. There's a lack of interest in talking about themselves, talking to other people, a shift out of their norm or their baseline, as we like to call it. So that's always something I like to look out for. And I think that it can be incredibly scary if somebody says that they're having these thoughts, even if they say they have no plan or intent or means, which is something, social workers have to look out for. We have to ask if this person has a plan. We, of how they would do this. We have to ask if there is intent, which means that they actually plan on doing this. They don't just think about it. And then we have to see if they have means. So if their plan is to use a gun, but they don't possess a gun and they have no way of getting one, then there's that risk factor goes down. So that is something that I actually teach. I've taught that to my sister who is in high school and is not a social worker. And, I know that, teenagers have it so hard. And I actually explained to her the difference between plan, intent, and means. And is she going to use a Columbia scale on someone? No. I would, because I do that at my job, but that is something that I think is important to talk about, because I wanted to make it less scary for her. Because what if she's in a situation where a friend discloses that, and I want her to know what to do. And then of course I tell her, go get a teacher, go get an adult, find somebody safe who is actually trained in doing this. I have a good friend who works with high school students, and he called me one day and was like, I have a work crisis because a student disclosed to him that, they were having these kinds of thoughts. And, I thought, thank goodness he had me as a friend, because even though he had mandated reporter training, he's an athletic coach. So they didn't focus so much on mental health because they were just focused on, his job in teaching sports. And so, if he didn't have me as a friend, I don't know if he would have known what to do. So it's an incredibly sad and uncomfortable conversation to have with someone, even though I have been in this situation many times where I've had to assess clients. I've had to call my supervisor, see if somebody needs to get hospitalized, call a licensed person, even, call law enforcement, because that is protocol. It still doesn't, it gets easier, but it's still sad and hard and difficult and heartbreaking. And I'm trained in this. So, for people who are not, we can't have the expectation of them to handle it like a professional, but we can give them the tools of, hey, you know what? Just because somebody says this is going to happen doesn't mean we're past the point of no return. We can help them. You can maybe guide them to someone who can help. And you can Google what to do, and Google will tell you what the protocol is for whatever state you live in. And, we have, thank goodness, those kinds of resources. So all that to say, I know I kind of went in a lot of circles. I think it's important to empower people who are just regular people, because chances are we know someone who's struggling. And, even if you're just there to listen to them in the moment and encourage them and then say, hey, maybe you should seek professional help, I think that that's great. And that's such an important start.
Thank you. Again, I am just reflecting on a lot of things. I'm wondering if I ever practiced this before, if I even realized I did some of these things or not. And if I haven't, just, making sure that I prepare myself for next time. A lot of the things that you guys are saying is definitely true. And I think even maybe potentially your sister might be more prepared than I am to have these conversations, which is amazing to hear because, again, it just goes back to we don't talk about this enough. And to hear that there are some ways that we can, prepare and just be like, okay, now I know that I can listen if I don't have nothing to say. Or, now I know I can go to a person because we see people posting stuff at times that maybe we know it correlates to something or maybe we don't. We just it's this assumption. But do we say something? Do we not say something? Right? And then if it does get to that point where it is said, I feel like what do we do? Because I don't even know if I would. Right away, I don't know if I could even think of saying I'm going to go get somebody else, right? Because I would feel like it's so personal that I wouldn't even know if I could share that. So just even thinking about those things, it's very eye-opening on just reflecting on all of these different little habits that we have that we're so good at avoiding this topic, but we're not good at being prepared for this topic. So I guess my next question would be that, how... I know that you talked a little bit about talking about if you do hear that they're having suicide ideation. I'm learning it. Suicide ideation. Do we follow up with the question of how far do you have this plan? Is that the right way to? And I know that you guys said that there's no right way to do it, but just to give an idea, if I was to have this conversation, if I see my friend posting something negative and I know that it can get into something way deeper, would that be a good point for me to say hey, just want to let you know I'm here, just want to let you know I want to listen? Or is that pushing them too much to share their story? Would you guys advise on this end? And especially thinking about students, because I know you mentioned students, and knowing that students are going back to school right now, getting everything prepared, figuring out if they're going to have hybrid or not hybrid classes, or the risk factors, all of these different things. How do you navigate making sure that these conversations are started?
So, great questions. And, it's, again, as Karina mentioned, it's really just, it's complex. There's no one way because everyone's different. Everyone's mental health is different. Every individual is unique. And so if someone was just kind of two different, different scenarios, if you know someone, if you're good friends with somebody and you are noticing concerning behavioral changes, they're isolating themselves, they're not participating in events, they're posting, more gloomy statuses that's not like them, I'm hoping, will know that you care about them as a friend, as a person. And if you are coming with good intentions, because again, you don't know if that means they are suicidal or going through depression, or maybe something just really bad happened in their personal life and they just haven't disclosed it. Again, we don't want to make assumptions, right? But that there is a gut feeling of something's not right, or I have concerns about this person. So you can say, hey, I just wanted to reach out because as your friend, I've just noticed XYZ, and I just wanted to make sure that you're okay. Super appropriate. You're coming from a good place of intention. And that person, ultimately decides whether they feel comfortable being vulnerable with you. And again, but you are offering that to them. And that in itself is great and is enough. If you don't know someone really well, again, I just always, there's this stigma and belief that if you ask someone to talk about suicide, that you are almost somehow encouraging it or promoting it, or that they're going to do it. And that's not true. Actually, what the research says is that you actually need to be very upfront with someone and be direct. So if, let's say, your concerns now are that this person is suicidal or posting suicidal thoughts or ideations, posts, whatever it may be, you can say, hey, you've been talking about XYZ, or if it's someone you know, you don't know, again, you can just phrase it the same way. I think you can say, I've noticed you're commenting or talking about this, or have really been, very gloomy or dark. Are you having thoughts about killing yourself? And you can be very direct about that. Because if you have concerns about that person having suicidal thoughts, then you can be direct and say, are you having thoughts about killing yourself? Because you can tell someone, do you, they ask so many different ways that the person being asked can take it very like, are you okay? You can be like, yeah, I guess, or do you wish you were dead? And sometimes you say, no, but it would be easier. That's what I've heard. There's so many different ways that people can talk around that question without answering it directly. Without answering the question you really want to ask, which is, do you want to kill yourself? But are too afraid to maybe ask. So that's kind of my thoughts. Is it's an uncomfortable position maybe sometimes, but again, if you're having those thoughts and you think it's that serious, then I say yes, it's okay to be that direct.
It's really easy to get the answer we want from someone when we create our questions a certain way. It's really when we do trainings on preventing suicide, a lot of times we'll use as an example, like, you don't want to kill yourself, right? And then it's really easy for the person to say, oh no, of course not, because you're already answering it for them. You're showing them that you prefer a certain response, and you wouldn't do that though, right? Or you're not planning this, right? Or how bad is it actually? Because you're kind of minimizing it, you're tweaking it. So it is really important to be direct. And, that's a lot easier when this is something you practice. It's difficult to do, absolutely, but it's incredibly important. And I think also too, when it comes to just helping out friends and noticing somebody is not doing well, or they're being, kind of just depressed and negative online or in person, whatever it is, again, that you're noticing, I think that just telling them, like, hey, I'm available to talk, like, let's check in, do you want to FaceTime, like, how can I support you right now? Also, I know way earlier, Diosselyn, you talked about sometimes, when you try to help friends, you're not sure if you said something right, or if you asked properly, or if, is listening just enough? And yes, I do believe that listening a lot of times is enough. However, though, it's totally okay to ask that person, like, do you need me to just listen right now, or do you want my advice? And it's also okay to say, I don't really know how to help you. Do you know what you think you need right now? And if that person says, I don't know, let them be at that state. You're not a bad friend by not knowing how to help them. And they don't necessarily owe it to you or to us to tell us how to help them. If they don't know what they need right now, that's okay. The fact that you're willing to meet them where they're at is the best thing you can possibly do. Another thing too is, again, it can be really uncomfortable if you are directly asking if somebody has plans on harming themselves or harming someone else. And then you mentioned that you might have a difficult time saying, hey, I need to call another person because I'm genuinely scared. At that point, I would say, like, hey, how about we call? Would you feel comfortable if we do this? As at the bachelor's case management level that I work at, that's a big thing that I do. When we, if I need to tell a probation officer something important, a lot of times I try to do it with my client there so that I can support them and that we do it together and they don't feel isolated and alone. A lot of times, if we are making that call to my supervisor where I'm like, hey, I'm not a licensed person, I can't write a 5150 hold, but you are showing criteria and I need to see if you need to be hospitalized for suicidal ideations, I say, hey, we are going to go talk to my supervisor who's a licensed person, or we are going to have this conversation. So I think, instead of isolating them further, being willing to do that with them might make them more receptive.
Yes, thank you, Karina and Oscar, because I think those are good tips to have. Making sure that we're not guiding their answers, and making sure that we are including that right, and not just saying like, okay, you're gonna do this and you're gonna do that. Again, it just keeps triggering in my head, like trying to figure out how many times do I do that, where I'm isolating the person, or even just things like that I don't necessarily innately notice right away, but I can definitely start looking at it and noticing more. And I just want to point out, you guys, we're getting some feedback from our audience, and Luis Estrada said thank you, Oscar and Karina and myself, for this important information and these conversations that we're hosting. Again, we're all talked about how important this is, so thank you, Luis, for hearing us and listening in. And Pink Bloom had a question. She asked, how are you all taking care of your mental health needs, especially right now during COVID?
So that's, a great question, because sometimes people have this struggle with, what does self-care really look like? What does that mean? And it's so different for someone. One idea that I actually got off of social media, I think it was Twitter, was someone said to me, or just the tweet, it said, figure out what your love language is and treat yourself to what you really need. And so I was like, I never really thought about it that way. So I took, the test. For anybody out there, if you're bored at home one time and you have a few minutes to take your test to see what love language you have, I suggest you do it. But mine was words of affirmation and quality time. So what I do, because sometimes I do really bad about doubting myself, or maybe putting myself down with words, and I caught myself and I'm like, I got to work on that. Especially on rough days where I feel maybe I could have done better, or think whatever the case might be. Really taking the time to journal and say, I did my part, I did enough, I did my best, and that is enough, and to uplift myself. And then with quality time, whether that's, making some tea and getting a book that I've been wanting to read but been putting off, I'll do that. If I want to go for a walk and just reflect on my day, or just do something from just my time alone, then I do that. Or quality time with my friends. Sometimes I just get so drained and tired from work that I come home and I'm just like, I just want to be alone. But I also know that I really gain so much good from being with people I care about, with my family, with my friends. And so I reach out and I say, hey, do you want to hang out today? Even if I don't 100% want to, I force myself to, because 100% of the time, when my friends or family, I do visit them, they come over, whatever it be, I always end up leaving, or them leaving, and I feel so much better. I feel happier. I'm so glad I did that. I'm so glad I spent time. And that's just my own personal needs, what makes me feel better. So those are just some of the things that I'm doing that I'm realizing help me, and has been helping really during all of this, because it is a lot going on and it is hard every day. But again, with the roles that we have to take care of our mental health to be able to help everybody else,
Yeah, I think to effectively practice self-care, you have to get to know yourself really well. And this is a really great opportunity, even though I kind of hate everything about COVID. I think, though, it is a really great opportunity to get to know yourself. So maybe if you don't know what you like, take a love language quiz, journal, and see, what thoughts come out of your brain, and you'll learn if you're a visual learner or an auditory learner, or something like that. So something I know about myself is I am extremely type A. So something that is keeping me really put together is discipline. And I live a very disciplined lifestyle. I did prior to COVID, because that's how I managed, working in community mental health, for 40 hours a week, and being so young and managing my personal life and my professional life. And that's how I balanced everything. And then once COVID hit, I suddenly had this big lack of structure. Yes, I was still working, but At the time, I was completely working from home, and my gym was closed, and I was like, what do I do? And I had to learn new routines for myself. So what works for me, and this isn't to say it's going to work for everyone, is I have a very strict exercise regimen, and I make sure that I do that almost the same days of the week, every single week, for the same amount of time, because it's so important to take care of your body. And for me, taking care of my physical health improves my mental health like no other. And so I make sure that I still engage in that, even though I didn't like working out at home and I missed the gym and I missed the social aspect of it. I actually got to hit way more fitness goals during quarantine than I was when I was, having fun at the gym and using lighter weights and, talking to people. And then, so I got really disciplined there, and I have been hitting better goals in terms of food and my relationship to food and cooking healthy food. And I learned to like cooking, and I hated cooking. I did it for myself because I wanted to stay healthy, but I learned to enjoy it because I had time to do it. So, I still meal prep for myself. Haven't been good about it this week, but I try to go to bed early still so that I can be, awake and alive for my clients, even though I am doing most of my sessions over Zoom in my room. I make sure that when I wake up for work in the morning, even though nobody's going to see me, I get dressed and I brush my hair. I don't have to put on makeup, but I wake myself up, and that helps me feel so much better. So I try to be incredibly disciplined in terms of my physical health, and because it improves my mental health. I think if you can right now, pick up a new hobby, preferably something that you can do with your hands. Like if you're good at art or you're not good at art and you've always wanted to try it, go for it. My thing has become plants. I grew up in a family where gardening was so big and so important, and I was like, whatever. And then all of a sudden I was like, I'm surrounded by nothing in my room. And then I started buying so many house plants, and then I started taking care of my garden outside, and now that's something I get to do with my dad and with my sisters, and also by myself, and take care of living things that are growing in my room and giving me oxygen. So that's what's worked for me. And also being kind to yourself is so, so, so important. Social workers and therapists, we always talk about giving yourself positive affirmations, but it's really true. If you can wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, hey, you're really good at your job, you're going to be a lot better at your job that day than if you look in the mirror and go, oh my God, again, here we are, whatever. I don't want to look at myself. You're going to just do better if you say, hey, I'm good at my job. Even if you don't believe it that day, go prove yourself wrong or prove yourself right when you're giving yourself those positive affirmations. So my 3 tips are: get disciplined if it works for you, find a new hobby, preferably something you can do with your hands, and be kind to yourself.
Thank you. I'm going to take those tips too and try to implement them in my daily routine. I think like you guys said it, like it's been super hard to try to figure out that disciplined routine that we're going to have without us having this factors telling us that we need to go to work today. We need to get this at certain times. We need to get this task certainly done. There's a lot of more independence to an extent to some, because it's not the same situation for everybody. So I guess one of my last questions would be, because I know we're running short in time, because it is such a wonderful conversation. Honestly, I'm learning so much as we're going forward. But one of my last questions would be, we are experiencing a lot of loss. And I learned a little bit through all these different podcasts and conversations we had, where it's loss of identity. There's the racial movements that are happening right now with Black Lives Matters, and so much more with immigration that's going on as well. And then we have COVID, and then some people are losing family members and friends because of COVID, or they're in extreme situations, or like you said, there's so many things happening that we are experiencing a lot of loss. So I guess one of my last asks would be if you could give last words, last advice, last comments on if you are experiencing this loss, if you have lost a friend, a family member, identity, security, safety nets, etc. What are some tips? What are some advice? What are some last words that you guys would provide for individuals that are maybe experiencing this at this moment?
It is hard, and that's something that I always tell people. I'm not going to lie and say, oh, this is, it's going to get better, it's going to get easier. I don't know when that's going to be. I don't know how true that is, but to say this point in this place where you're at doesn't have to be the place where you stay forever. And you have tools and resources to help you whenever you are at a point and you are ready to ask for that help. Because loss and grief, sometimes talking about that loss, whatever loss it may be, it might be really hard. It might be really fresh. It might hurt too much to talk about it. And that's okay. I think as, it's two-sided. It's as people who want to help, we have to make sure that we let people know we're here to help. And then, if we are wanting help, to reach out to, my advice is ignore those voices in your head that tell you that you're going to be a burden, or that nobody wants to listen to this or to you, or that, somehow your problems are less than. All that, I challenge you to push through those voices and reach out. Send a text to a friend, someone who you are comfortable, a mentor, a family member, a stranger, someone on Facebook who made a post that says, if you are having suicidal thoughts, if you are going through a crisis, reach out to me. I am here. Talking sometimes to someone who you don't know sometimes is actually easier, because, they don't have those stigmas or preconceived ideas of you. And somehow you open up easier to them. So I always say, if you are going through a loss and it's becoming overwhelming to a point where you say, I might need more support, or I don't know if I can manage all these emotions by myself, then reach out. Try to push through those voices, those concerns, those fears. And just, people, I think, are surprised at how much talking about it helps. How much getting that off of your chest and pointing it out and just feeling heard and validated of this is what's going on with me, and I just need somebody to notice that. That can be so helpful. So those are my things. As I mentioned, I love and specialize in loss and grief because I think it is a taboo topic that no one talks about enough. And so, reach out to people, to specialists, to people who, friends, maybe not specialists, just depending on the level of you are and yourself the best. Again, be kind to yourself and show grace enough to be able to ask for that help and say that you are worthy of that help.
Thank you so much. I think those are really powerful words to reflect on and just to remember as we go forward with this. And I just want to note to everybody that we are sharing resources. Karina has shared a couple of resources with us, so we are sharing them in the comments. So please check those out. Like you are hearing over and over, there are so many ways that we can help by just listening, by just talking, by breaking this stigmatism of, I don't know, that was not the right word, I think, but I'm sorry. But by breaking the stigma of what we are taught to avoid. So please check those links out under the comments. And Karina, would you mind giving us some last tips and advice?
Something really cliche that really annoyed me to hear growing up that I didn't really understand, and now I really try to abide by as an adult, is that we have to be kind to each other and we have to cling to one another. You always hear be nice to people, be nice to people, be nice to people, and I felt like, okay, that's kind of all right. Let's be nice. That seems important. But that means to be truly kind to someone, we have to listen to each other. We have to be quiet sometimes and hear each other and advocate for each other and stand up for one another. If there's a day where you can't stand up for yourself, it would be amazing if someone could stand up for you. And maybe one day when you're strong enough to stand up for someone, you can do that for someone else. I'm a big believer in chain reactions, and I know if I'm treated with love and kindness one day by my coworkers, by my clients, by the man who helps me at the grocery store, by the mailman, I'm then going to be super kind to the people that I see out in the street and my family when I get home and anyone else I interact with. And then they will probably go and do the same with their coworkers and their parents and their friends and the people that they interact with. I think something I enjoyed during quarantine in April, I noticed people were really nice. People were really kind. I reconnected with people from college and high school that I hadn't spoken to in years, just saying, hey, just checking in. How's your family? And I'm like, wow, you haven't asked me about my family or myself in 4 years. And you know what? I'm not even mad that we didn't check in for 4 years. I'm glad you're here now. And I found that my heart was in a kinder space. So we have to understand everyone's going through it right now. We don't have to compare like, well, I've had it worse because this, or this person's had it worse, so I shouldn't be sad. Like, we're all struggling and it's okay. Yes, of course, some people have it worse. That doesn't mean that they deserve so much more pity than you, and that doesn't mean that you get to then neglect your own emotions. So we have to support each other right now and be kind and just meet each other where we're at, because we're all very different places.
Again, thank you both so much for being here today. And I agree, Karina. I love the fact that you said chain reactions. I never had the word for it, but now I will. That chain reaction, I truly believe in it as well. Just saying, we bring each other up and we're each other's pillars, fortes. And, like you said, and I think you mentioned it earlier. We all have our experiences and we're passionate about what we're passionate about for that same reason, because we know how it feels and we want to make sure that we can make these things better. So thank you both for being here again. I want to express so much thankfulness. I know that this is just the beginning of a lot more conversations, a lot of more digging into these topics. You guys mentioned a lot of different mental health issues that, we have yet to talk about. So Karina, I hope that you join us again in the future. Oscar, thank you so much for being here again. And I just want to remind everybody in the audience that this podcast will be shared via Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Midwest Chicana. So please watch again and share. Again, there's so many resources out there. And what's more, Karina, thank you so much for being here. And Oscar,
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And Oscar, likewise. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and glad to always come back and talk more when invited.
Thank you again. Anybody who is listening, if you guys want to talk more or learn more about this topic, let us know, and we're going to see if our guests here would be willing to come back with us again. So again, thank you, everybody. Tune in next day, and have a great night. Bye.
See you again.